Everyone, please welcome Clark College's very own Fellene Gaylord.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Bruce. It's wonderful to be back at the podium again. I presented last year as part of this class, and it was a fun challenge to work up and give some thought to my whole process, my path that led me from being a designer to a developer, or a dev-ziner, as some would say, and some of the lessons that I've learned along the way. So shall we dive in? So first of all, every job has lessons to teach you. A few years ago, I decided to make a list of all of the jobs I've ever had in my entire life. I came to 33 different jobs. A lot of them have been, kind of short-term jobs, and some of them were pretty funky. My worst jobs, I think, were working at a plastics molding factory as a machine operator for 2 days, and that was pretty horrendous. And then my second worst job was filleting fish in a fish factory, knee-deep in fish guts, and with. So luckily, I was rescued by a job offer to be a waitress the next day, and I was like so thrilled. Anyway, so my best job has been working for myself at Sirius Media, having my own business, my own development company, and making my own decisions. Although sometimes I'm a pretty hard boss. I find that it's like I'll sit there and beat myself up about doing stuff. It's like, oh, you really should be. And then the employee answers back. It gets really strange. The second best job has been teaching here at Clark College. It's been really a wonderful journey to be able to share some of my skills with my students, and I learn stuff from you guys all the time. Every class that I teach, I'm learning things that I had no clue was out there. So it's been a wonderful journey. So I just want to spend a little time kind of explaining how I got here. In 1972, I had just graduated from high school, and I started off in print production. I had been on the high school art staff. I'd been designing posters for theater plays and for the programs and some of the local banners in the high school. We did a mural and stuff. So I had a little bit of art experience, and in Chicago I was able to start off straight out of high school doing production for print. So I worked for a newspaper, the Stickney Berwyn Cicero Life newspaper. Each one came out like 1 day a week, so we had 3 newspapers that we put out 1 day a week. And then my second one was a film cutting artist for a silkscreen company that created real estate signs. So basically, we would cut the ruby lith and design the artwork and go ahead and make real estate signs. I moved out to Oregon, tried doing the same thing, didn't work because there wasn't a print industry here in Oregon. And so many, even back in 1973, there were people moving out from back east who had more skills than I did. They had the college credentials. And so I decided finally, after 7 years of floating around doing kind of hand calligraphy menus and sign painting and stuff, that I was going to go back to school. I started off at graphic design at the University of Oregon. And then the next year I moved to Portland State University, where majored in graphic design, minored in Middle Eastern Studies, which hasn't gotten me anything except a slight understanding into some of the world politics that we deal with. So you're talking about history and culture. You never know how that stuff is going to pay off. And really, just kind of giving you an understanding of how other cultures work is actually really an important skill. So in 1982, I graduated with a BA in graphic design. So I got my first real design job at a company called MNI, which stood for Mike Nichols Incorporated. He was a consultant and trainer for the automotive parts industry, teaching inventory management. And back in the day, people weren't really thinking in terms of just-in-time inventory management, so that was kind of one of his big concepts he was teaching people about. He had 5 different courses for different aspects of inventory management, and all of them had slides that instead of PowerPoint were actual slides that you'd use on an overhead projector. So he'd have like this case. For each course, he'd have this case that he would lug around. But it was a great opportunity for me because I got to work on branding the company. I designed the logo. I designed their trade show booth. Got to do multi-language design projects because he would travel to Korea, Japan, and in the Middle Eastern countries. So I got to do Arabic business cards. I got to do Japanese business cards. And luckily we didn't have a whole lot of, translation of every class that he had. But we did cover like collateral. I also got to do a lot of cartooning, which is fun just from the artistic perspective. And in 1986, I got to use my very first computer. It was one of those tiny Macs. And I got to do page layout and design using Ready, Set, Go and CorelDRAW were the 2 programs that I used at the time. And it just seemed like such an amazing, wonderful tool. Before that, we would have like printouts for each page that were done from typeset type, and then to paste the page numbers, you had to go and paste it in the exact same spot, and then we'd Xerox those materials and stuff. And getting those page numbers in the right space was so tedious and so difficult. And when I got Ready, Set, Go, and I got to actually, it's like, oh, it paginates right there. You don't even have to tell it what page number. It was a miracle. It was really amazing. So after that, I worked at TriMet for 15 years. I was hired in 1989, and I was hired because I was a designer that had used a computer, and there weren't very many people that did that. Actually, I had to share the computer that I got to use with the typesetter. So I'd have to ask, Jeff, can I use the computer this afternoon? Okay. So, which led to, a lot of problems with productivity. But I got to accomplish a lot of firsts at TriMet. I got to design the very first desktop published brochure. We used GIS, which is Geographic Information Systems, software to design the very first system app. I got to design the first website that had a trip planner on the homepage. Got to initiate the online store for tickets and passes, which had never existed before, and other transit agencies were doing that. We got to work on the first interactive map interface. And this was back with Google, was first starting to do interactive maps. And they knew that TriMet had a really robust database for the locations and for the trip planner and for the routes. So we worked with them to figure out some of the interactive map design decisions. So at the time, nobody knew, it's like, oh, what happens? So if you want to zoom in or zoom out, how do people do that? So figuring out, what were the tools people are going to use? What were the expectations? So now we're pretty used to panning around a map, but probably some of you remember when the maps had those big arrow buttons on the side. So if you wanted to move, you'd have to hit the arrow. Oh, no, I want to be down. So it was just great to be a part of that innovation in user interface. And in 2004, I got to design the first TriMet trip planning app for smartphones. And actually here, I was going to correct that. It's a feature phone, because we didn't have smartphones yet. So it was a feature phone that you could use with trip, you could plan a trip, you could find out when the next bus was coming. And I told my boss, this is gonna be your killer app. And she's like, but data costs so much and people aren't gonna have these fancy phones. Just wait, honey, just wait. Anyways, these two bus passes were up there. Those are part of some of my print design work. And it was really a great opportunity for me. This was the very first TriMet website.
Wow.
1996. And you can see that basically it's just a page with a bunch of links on it, and there's no hierarchy of information. The pictures are just as important as the bus information. The hats off to TriMet section is just as important as the job. So everything is kind of like all very flat as far as information architecture goes. I got to be involved in this website because I was the one who designed the maps, and somebody needed to create the 88 GIFs that they needed for the bus and Max light rail page. So every route had its own page, and they needed a GIF. So I decided to, I dove into HTML, and the more I worked on it, the more I got excited about it. And it kind of turned on this little light in me that's like the part that I always loved about graphic design as opposed to fine art is that you're actually doing stuff that people use. You're actually presenting information for people to use. And I got to do a lot of that at TriMet, but this was making it interactive, and it just like, wow, this is fun. So here's some of the other pieces that I got to work on. This is the Max light rail billboard. So that was a billboard up along Interstate Avenue. Lots of maps of various parts of town. Remember Fairless Square? You could ride free. That was so nice. And then those bus passes down in the corner were part of an award-winning series of summer youth pass promotions that we did. It was very fun. So one of the advantages that I did have by working at TriMet is they had a generous college education fund that you could use. You could use up to $2,000 a year for college tuition, as long as it was applied to what you were studying. So I used that money to go back to school to Portland State and get my multimedia professional certificate. That was a really fun and exciting time for me because I was diving into all this coding. I was learning stuff about computers, multimedia programming. I got to learn Flash animation, which now seems like so antiquated, but at the time it was really fun because you could actually make things animate without having to draw individual panels. I also learned how to use Macromedia Director, which is something so obsolete now that I'm trying to think of what the closest equivalent, well, it was probably a cross between like After Effects, perhaps, and with a little bit of WordPress thrown in. Anyways, but our target platforms in 1998 weren't even the web. Our target platforms were interactive CDs because that was the easiest way to provide a lot of information, and internet connections just didn't have the bandwidth yet. So you couldn't really, show and display a lot of, image information or videos online. Just wasn't there. But you could do it in a CD that would run in a kiosk. So this was the website design that won the FTA, Federal Transit Administration, top transit website in 2002. And the biggest innovation was the fact that the trip planner had tabs, and the trip planner was on the home page. At the time we were thinking about this, I really had to advocate that to management that when people are thinking about TriMet, they're probably thinking about when the next bus is coming and how to get the bus. And that we should consider ourselves a travel website as opposed to a corporate website. And at the time, the airlines were just starting to, kind of like have ticket sales online where you could do that. So I took a lot of inspiration from that and then added the features for the maps. So you could get, schedules and map pages for every route individually. The next arrivals, which we ended up calling Transit Tracker later on, could find out when the next bus was coming, and then the online store.
Really?
Yeah.
Notice you have the little wheelchair symbol up there. Was that because the site was actually accessible, or is that just if people needed accessibility things with the buses? Or is that a website accessibility feature?
Good question. Yes, it is a website accessibility thing.
Especially when that was back in 2002.
In 2002, even then, you still had the ADA was in effect and applied to all government communications. So since TriMet isn't a government entity itself, but it is basically it's a state corporation, it got money from the feds, it had to comply to all accessibility. So basically this little link would kind of like bypass some of this navigation here, and it would take you to basically something a text reader could use. But yeah, good question. We also had information in different languages here. So quite frankly, those weren't interactive. It would take you to a PDF that you could open up. But you could get information how to ride the bus and the basic information in Spanish, Vietnamese, Russian, and Chinese. So, which actually is pretty cool. You notice there's no social media involvement anywhere here on the page because it didn't exist yet. And we do have, basic links here to various information.
Fellene?
Yeah.
How did your content strategy shift? You're a brochure site, now you're going to the web, or you're a CD, and now you're going. Did that change? I assume that changed dramatically.
Oh yeah, it changed tremendously, and actually it took a lot of interior kind of like work and negotiation. And once management started to figure out that, that they had ownership of certain parts of the website, then there got to be turf battles as to kind of like what was going to be showing up, in some of this content here, and what was going to be showing up here. So yeah, we started getting into, this was...
Conflict management.
Yes, exactly. And kind of like a little bit of a battle between marketing. So here, this part is marketing, and then this part is kind of like the outreach. And so at TriMet, you had like two different functions. Marketing was all about selling bus, and then outreach was telling you when the bus was going to be late. So, yeah, it was an interesting.
This is before the yellow line too.
Yeah, it was right there before the yellow line. Yes.
So were you also using web coding at this time, or just
Yes.
designing?
At this point, I was doing the front end coding. So as a front end developer, in addition to doing the design work. But so I could kind of like, I figured out how to get these tabs and to get the different divs to show up on top. And then all the back end stuff there was this whole team of developers that I worked with. And so they worked on the interior pages and kind of like, they would give me a link for the next arrivals. So they're like, okay, so here's a link for each line, and so, I didn't have to go find that, but it was really wonderful to have that team with us.
Was there a sense of ads for like other outside companies when you were designing that?
Not on this particular site. At the time, they were really aggressively marketing ad space on the outside of buses and the inside of buses, but not on the website. Actually, I don't think that they ever have put ads on the inside of the website. Yeah, but they were selling every square inch on the inside of the buses, and there were even some ads that would be like on the ceiling, or on the floor, and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So this one you had monetized the website. You haven't monetized the website this one.
No, I don't work there anymore, so I'm not sure. But I don't believe that they ever have monetized the website. Cool. All right, so in 2002, this is an example of my personal work. So I started Sirius Media just kind of like, okay, I'm gonna be doing a few side projects. And I'd always done some side projects for print, but I decided to just start, kind of like giving myself a home on the web, just like I gave my employer. So one of the features here, unfortunately this doesn't work, but the whiz-bang feature on this is I had different CSS style sheets that you could choose to, which would change the whole background, the typeface. It would, basically the layout stayed fairly the same, but by changing those CSS links, it totally changed the look of the site. So that was kind of a fun little thing that you could do. And so CSS pretty much started around 2000. And we didn't use it at TriMet very aggressively at first because we had to be backwards compatible. So our goal at TriMet was to meet the needs. Our site had to work in 95% of the available browsers going to the site. So you take a look at our web trends information and say, oh, okay, we have to go back to IE, 2.0 or whatever. And so those browsers at the time weren't all compatible with CSS.
Was 95% just a number somebody picked out?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, they figured it's like you could go crazy trying to chase that last 5%. Because there are always outliers, and especially people who either had systems that were really arcane or archaic, and it's like you can't please everybody. But if we can, have it work on 95%. And so, yeah, all this stuff was all HTML. Even this was HTML. Yeah.
On your personal website, when you have the cool feature where that doesn't work anymore, where you click on the CSS button and it change the background and the font and type stuff and everything. Was that to show what you could do? I mean, was this kind of an advertising thing for you, or were you kind of more playing, or?
It was kind of a playground. I wasn't really expecting anybody to say, oh, I really want that on my website. Although I had used it later on in like changing type font sizes. So one of my first freelance projects was a project for a social service agency. I think there's going to be a picture of it here in a minute. That you could actually make the type bigger, and basically it was just changing to a different style sheet. So it kind of used the same thing. So 2004, I moved up the hill to the Center for Women's Health. That was a great opportunity. I never expected to be anywhere close to medical school. Let me just put it that way. But I got to be an expert up there in graphic design and worked with the Center for Women's Health on their website. I initiated the use of email newsletters for outreach. We created one of the first online searchable databases for women's health conditions. We supported the Women's Health Research Unit, put on an annual conference for women's health, and had monthly free health events at Nordstrom's. So a lot of that content all went up on the website afterwards, but it really created a great resource. So 2006, I was offered an opportunity at a company up here in Vancouver called J.D. White. And some of my TriMet colleagues had moved up here and asked me to come with them. And there I was a project manager in graphic design. So, and they were a planning, basically a community planning agency. So I was part of the public involvement team, providing support to public agencies and businesses, various developers, investors, and local tribes. Did website design development, a lot of maps, print design, and this is where I learned about estimates and proposals and project planning and time tracking. ARG. So their time tracking element was the hardest for me because they had this really convoluted system that you had to know the code for every project and then the code for every task, and you had to track all the hours in the day, even when you went to the bathroom, and charge it to somebody. And it was just, I would spend 45 minutes at the end of the day trying to figure out my time tracking. So it just...
And what do you use now?
I'll get to that. So, these are some of the projects that I worked on there, and Riverwalk was a development that never happened out in Camas. We've been the Eugene City Hall Master Plan, and the Cowlitz Casino Resort has become, yes, it makes me happy every time I go up there, even though I'm not a gambler and I probably will never go in the place, but it's just interesting to have been something like that. So this is what my website evolved into in 2008. So this here is the website that I was talking about that had the various size zoom that you can use here to enlarge type. And so it's just kind of ironic that this particular, I got this from the Wayback Machine. So I pulled this up and I was like, oh, look, we're certified as elder friendly by Elders in Action. That's cool. And then I said, this is DARPing in action. I was like, what the hell is DARPing? Then I decided it's design for AARP. So there's like a term that I think it probably went, you know. Anyways, so, and it's interesting to talk about being a communications director for Kaifu, and that was back when I was just getting started. So you can see I've simplified my navigation a little bit and just focusing on home, print, web, and contact. So, 2009, I got laid off of that job at Berger Abam. It was the economic downturn, and I was the only person doing web development, and we just weren't attracting projects big enough for our new international overlord bosses back in France to feel that we were making enough money on web projects. But it was a wonderful opportunity for me to really give this freelance thing a shot. Basically, I had unemployment for 6 months, and I'm like, okay, if I can use this unemployment and start building websites, maybe at the end of the 6 months, I can have enough. And I managed to do it. It was pretty amazing. So my focus is I build smart websites for small businesses, nonprofits, and individuals. I also provide graphic design, branding, and cartography. But I have learned to focus my attention for my website and for my marketing all about the website development, and that it's for the right size business. There are businesses that are going to be way too big for me. I don't try for them. And I actually have since refined it for people who are graduating to their second or third website. That's where I provide the most value. There are a lot of people who can start off with Wix and just get something up there, and then they realize the limitations. And so this is where my expertise really becomes more valuable, and I can really give them the benefit of my expertise. But I have clients that range from trout farmers backhoe operators. I used to have one that was a septic service, jazz singers, artists, authors, chiropractors. It's been amazing the different types of people that I get to work with. And I love the variety and I love the challenge because everybody's needs are different. I've built over 150 websites for clients since that time. Oh, that's right. And now, I've rebranded. So I just rebranded myself this year, and boy, that was the hardest logo I have ever done. Because, you know, it's like I have to be the designer and the decider at the same time. I almost gave it to somebody else.
What did you consider cartography? What is that category for you?
Basically any map making. Okay. So when I was at TriMet, I made maps from like the very original ways when we used to do it with ruby lift tapes and on mylar panels that were held up with pins and different layers. And then graduating over into GIS and Illustrator-based systems. So, but I still love maps. That's always going to be a fond project for me. So this was my 2012 website. This was, I'm trying to think if the last one was in WordPress. But this one was definitely in WordPress, and I was really starting to move all of my clients into WordPress. And you can see just from my navigation, I've got a lot more focused approach here. We're talking about web portfolio design services. There's nothing about, maps or photos or, stuff. If you want to see that, that'll be in the blog posts and the contact. I also talk about what are the features, what are the things that I really bring to the website development field, and the fact that, it's not just, somebody up there who's learned how to do HTML. It's like I'm a real designer. I know how to provide customer service, and I focus on building responsive websites because these days you cannot build a website without it being mobile friendly. So here's some examples of some of the sites that I've worked on. A lighting designer, a weaver with an e-commerce store, a women's health coach, and then interior designers. And then these two were my most recent big projects. The World Forestry Center is over on the right-hand side, and that was really a wonderful project, but it did take a lot of project management and several contractors and probably about 9 months. So the one on the left is for the Rose City Yarn Crawl, which is an event for knitters that happens every year. Okay, cool. And here's what my website looks like now. Okay, so I'm gonna skip this section. Top 10 nuggets of wisdom. I've got like 10 minutes. So.
Chicken nuggets?
Those are chicken nuggets, which need sauce. So just a little Rick and Morty shout out there. Okay, so my top 10 nuggets are to find a need and fill it. You can go out there and say, oh, I want to do this and I need to follow my passion. Well, if nobody needs that, you're not going to build a business on it. So you need to find something that really works for people. So these examples are, my clients who provide hairdressing for seniors in nursing homes, or the backhoe operator. Check in with clients often. Make sure that you stay communicating with everybody. If you're going to be late, let them know you're going to be late. If you're running over, you need to let them know, but you're going to establish trust and keep lines of communications clear. Oh, and that's a telephone for those of you who don't know. So, back it up and lock it down, as I'm sure Bruce has hammered into your heads. You've got to keep your system secure, make sure that you've got security for everything that you're working on, and make sure that you've got stuff backed up. Enough said there. ask for help if you need it. It's okay to ask for help, especially if you're working on your own. There are lots of times I have to, shout out to other people and like, wait a minute, this is a part of PHP I never really studied before, or stuff like that. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Or, whether you're working independently or not, you're always going to need help. Keep your skills sharp. Just because you get out of college doesn't mean you know everything. No matter how far you go, even if you get a master's degree, you always need to keep educating, particularly in the computer fields. So do what you can to stay on top of the current techniques. Join groups that are going to help you stay on top of things like Kaifu. And just attend conferences, take advantage of seminars, do workshops, do webinars. Keep your skills sharp because they are always changing. So keeping up with the bookwork. Oh, Ginny. Oh, she left. I'll have to. Okay, so use a good time tracker. So online tools like FreshBooks or Harvest are invaluable. Harvest makes it so easy for me to keep track of my time, to create estimates, to send out invoices, and to manage the cost of the projects. Because it tells me, it's like, oh, you've run over, you're up to 80% of this project, and here's your check-in point. And of course, QuickBooks is essential for anybody running a business on their own. Take time off. As Christine was just saying, you just get overloaded with so much digital input, and we're so likely to kind of like keep going, and it's like, oh, I have to look at this page, or check social media. Make sure you take some time. Give yourself digital sabbaticals. Even if you're just going to this lovely place in your mind, just shut down, go for a walk, and really kind of like take a break, and you'll think better afterwards. You definitely will. Build your toolkit. Find the themes, the tools, the fonts that are flexible and responsive and that you can use to build the wide variety of the projects that you like. So I have particular themes in WordPress that I use, and I go to those time and time again. And find your flock. So find other people, especially if you're working alone, find other people who are also in business, who can help you build your business and provide support. I belong to this women's business group, and last week we took a retreat out to the beach and just spent like 3 days talking about our personality needs, and then the business needs, and how to become better business people. And we're cheerleaders for each other. We provide each other networking connections, and it's really been a wonderful experience. Okay, so we'll see if this video plays. But the one thing, okay, good.
I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed.
So I just think that is so important to remember, because we all run into situations where we don't excel, or we are frustrated, or we didn't do something correctly, and it's so easy to beat ourselves up about it. Just remember that is an investment in your own future. It's an investment in the skills that you're going to develop in the future. Every time you fail is a learning opportunity, and if you don't take advantage of that opportunity, you've missed that investment. So I'm not going telling you to go out there and fail, but I just want you to know that when you run into those roadblocks, it's okay. And go out there, take risks, be creative, fail harder, and you will succeed.